What the fuck is up? Welcome back. My name is Noah Hills. You can find me on Twitter at noahmoreparties. You can find my written work and my running back rankings for Dynasty leagues, Devy leagues, and the current 2023 rookie class over at noahmoreparties.com. And today, I want to talk about what's on everybody's mind. Rashad Penny or DeAndre Swift in Philadelphia. Let's get right into it. First of all, I think very obviously, this situation represents a bit of an upgrade for both of these guys. Last season, the Philadelphia offense was second in points, second in yards, 12th in yards per carry, 5th in total rushing yards, second in rushing first downs, first in rushing touchdowns by 8 over the second place Cowboys, first in rush DVOA, with more than double the rush DVOA of the 4th place Cincinnati Bengals, first in EPA per rush, expected points added per rush attempt, by almost double, or more than double, over the second place Baltimore Ravens. Their EPA per rush was more than the EPA per dropback. Even though league-wide we all know passing is more efficient than running, the Philadelphia Eagles averaged more EPA per rushing attempt last season than all but 9 offenses averaged per dropback. So that is absolutely ridiculous. Their success rate per rush was 50.7%. That's the number one mark in the league. They were the only team in the league with a mark above 50%, so they were the only team in the league that succeeded more often than they failed when running the ball. They had the 3rd-ranked run-blocking offensive line according to PFF, and according to Football Outsiders metrics like adjusted line yards, they were 6th. Power success rate, they were 7th. Stuffed rate, they had the 7th lowest stuff rate in the league. Like they're just a ridiculously good offensive line, like 3 Pro Bowlers, 2 first-team All-Pros, 4 returning starters, including those 3 Pro Bowlers and those 2 first-team All-Pros from that offensive line. This is a ridiculously juicy situation for any running back. And Miles Sanders last season, who we know to be a talented player, his first few years in the league, he was like fairly up and down, struggled with some inconsistencies. But last year, he had more points per game, more PPR points per game from rushing alone. So if Miles Sanders hadn't caught a single pass last season, he had more PPR points per game from rushing alone than David Montgomery, Antonio Gibson, Javonte Williams, J.K. Dobbins, and Tyler Algier had total. So all those guys are allowed to catch passes also. Miles Sanders did more than them just by running the ball. He had more points per game from running the ball than anybody in the league but Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, and Jamal Williams, who experienced historic volume and historic efficiency near the goal line. Miles Sanders is now gone. There's now 200 touches plus up for grabs in this offense. We've got Kenny Gainwell, Trey Sermon's on the team, Kennedy Brooks is somewhere on the practice squad. Boston Scott's hanging around somewhere. But we also have DeAndre Swift, and we also have Rashad Penny on this team. Let's talk about Rashad Penny first. Outside of an 11-carry 2020 season, he's never had a box-adjusted efficiency rating in his career below the 68th percentile. He's been one of the most efficient running backs on a per-carry basis. Yeah, I know he's hurt all the time. I know he really has never played a full season, blah, blah, blah. But on a per-carry basis, the dude is absolutely elite. Like I said, box-adjusted efficiency rating, which essentially measures per carry efficiency, but without the caveats of like, well, yeah, that guy played on a good team, so blah, blah, blah. Or, well, yeah, he was inefficient, but he played on a bad team. Or, yeah, he was efficient, but like he just plays on 3rd downs against light boxes. Like, remove those caveats, or rather account for those caveats, and then spit out a number that tells you how efficient a guy was in the context of them. Rashad Penny has never been below the 68th percentile on a per carry basis from an efficiency standpoint, other than the 2020 season when he had just 11 carries. In 2021, his 172% box-adjusted efficiency rating means that the average carry for Rashad Penny, given the box counts that he was seeing, was worth 72% more than the average carry for all other collective running backs on the Seattle Seahawks in that season. Like, just think about what that means. That's ridiculous. If everybody else on the team averaged 5 yards per carry, what is 172% of 5? That's, I don't know, that's like more than 8. That's stupid. It's ridiculously good, ridiculously efficient. That's in the 99th percentile and is the number 4 mark in the last 6 years, going back to 2016, the 4th highest mark among all running backs with at least 100 carries in a season in that time frame, behind only rookie Kareem Hunt, who we know was awesome, and 2018 Ezekiel Elliott, who was still awesome back then, and 2016 Carlos Hyde, who was pretty good back then for a very fleeting moment. So that was really impressive in 2021. Also, again, above the 68th percentile in all those other years. Last season, 142% box adjusted efficiency rating. You can do the mental math in your head about how good that is. But it was fourth among backs with 50 plus carries last season, behind only Dameon Pierce, Khalil Herbert, and Breece Hall, guys we know to be stud ball carriers in the NFL. He has a little bit of a reputation as like we know that Rashad Penny is an explosive big play runner. Sometimes he's not the most consistent runner on a down-to-down basis, but he hasn't been prohibitively boom bust since his rookie season. His rookie season, he had a negative 12% relative success rate, which is absolutely terrible, succeeding on 12% fewer of his attempts than the other guys in Seattle. That was very bad, but since then, 2% greater than the other guys in Seattle. Then the 2020 season when he barely touched the ball. Then slightly negative in 2021. And then last season, 4.3% relative success rate. That's pretty damn good. 71st percentile. So last season, he finally really put it together. Well, he did in 2019 as well, but last season was really good. Put it together as an explosive, efficient runner on a per carry basis, also churning out positive outcomes at a really high rate relative to what other guys operating in the same offensive environment as he were doing. So Rashad Penny's a really good running back when he's healthy. He just hasn't been healthy much. DeAndre Swift also has this reputation for being a serial run bouncer, no vision, turning down, bailing on structure all the time, making bad decisions, things like that. But the on-field results have really only matched that reputation in one of his 3 seasons so far. In 2021, he was absolutely terrible. 97.5% box-adjusted efficiency rating, so slightly less efficient than the other guys with the Lions that year, but negative 12.8% relative success rate. That is abysmally bad. 9th percentile relative success rate that season. But in 2020, his relative success rate was 10.8% higher than the other guys in Detroit. That's in the 91st percentile. And last season, 4.4% higher than the other guys in Detroit. That's a 72nd percentile mark. So other than this, this terrible 2021 season, his reputation as this completely unreliable, frustrating decision maker doesn't really match the on-field results. Like, they just don't reflect what his reputation says about him. And I wonder if some of that reputation comes from vividness bias. Like, when you're as bad as he was in 2021, like, you just lose the benefit of the doubt. Those frustrating decisions, negative plays, just stick with coaches, stick with fans. But even so these, box adjusted efficiency rating, relative success rate, things like that, these are metrics that I created that I like to look at. I understand that they're not infallible. Team relative efficiency metrics are not the end all be all. Set those aside for a second and look at some of the, more inherent to him metrics over at playerprofiler.com from last season. True yards per carry, which removes the impact from long runs. Anything above 10 yards on a given run is like it never happened. He was 8th in the league in true yards per carry last year. Juke rate, which is like missed tackles forced per attempt at PFF. 16th in the league last year. Yards created, 2nd in the league on a per touch basis last year. Like, he was a good, effective running back on a per carry basis last season. It's just difficult to regain the trust of a coaching staff. Like, he was not going to regain Dan Campbell's trust last year. That's obvious. Like, his volume got scaled back. He had 11.6 carries per game in 2021, 64% route participation in 2021, 7.1 carries per game in 2022, despite playing better, and 46.3% route participation in 2022, again, despite playing better on the ground. Like, he just lost himself playing time by playing poorly in 2021, even though he came back and was better in 2022. He also has not been trusted, at the goal line, in short yardage situations, obvious running downs during his time in Detroit. The average box count that he's seen during his time in Detroit has been 0.29 defenders lighter than what other Lions running backs have faced, collectively on average. That's in the 17th percentile. So very light boxes relative to what other guys in the team have been seeing, which indicates that he's just not being put on the field, not being, allowed to carry the ball in situations where defenses are packing the box very often. But in situations where there's 3 or fewer yards to go, or against 8 or 9 man boxes, heavy defensive fronts, in short yardage situations, his success rate on those carries in his career has been virtually the same as other Lions running backs, actually 0.2% higher than the collective success rate in those situations for other Lions running backs, and 6.8% higher than the league average in those situations. He's been an above average short yardage runner during his career. I'm not trying to make some sort of like hipster take like DeAndre Swift is not actually a run bouncer. He doesn't actually make frustrating decisions, blah, blah, blah. Like that's not my take. My take is just that I think his reputation has jumped the shark a little bit. He's become a little bit underrated in some of those areas. He's kind of like your friend who like has a reputation for farting all the time, even though he doesn't actually fart all the time anymore. Like maybe like, I don't know, like in high school, dude was like ripping ass every day, like every time you hung out with him, and it was awful. It smelled bad. It was just bad. And then now you're like 4 or 5 years removed. He doesn't really do that anymore, but like a couple times a year, he'll like have a bad fart. And so he still has this reputation as the dude who farts all the time, even though that's like, he's not actually farting any more often than anybody else is. That's kind of like DeAndre Swift and bouncing runs. But regardless, I think DeAndre Swift is not being brought into Philadelphia to be like their steady, reliable, two-down runner, their short yardage and goal line back. Jalen Hurts led the Eagles in short yardage carries last season. The tush push is still legal. They converted 90.5% of them last season. Hurts is probably still going to be the go-to guy in short yardage for the Eagles. There's no reason for them to move away from him. And then all the scraps are going to go to Rashad Penny. He's bigger. He's more powerful. He has a cleaner reputation in that area than DeAndre Swift has, despite, I might add, having a lower success rate in his career in those situations than DeAndre Swift has. But in general, I also think that this kind of the situational improvement, the schematic fit for Rashad Penny in this offense is greater than it is for DeAndre Swift. If you look at the kind of runs that Rashad Penny has like handled during his time throughout his career in Seattle, 72% of them have come on zone concepts, whether that's split zone, outside zone, inside zone, whatever. Zone concept runs have made up 72% of his total attempts, and he's been good on those. He's averaged 0.48 yards per carry, greater than the other Seattle running backs on those specific types of runs, on zone runs. That's in the 71st percentile. So Rashad Penny is a good zone runner. On gap runs that have represented 28% of his career total carries, he's averaged 3.27 yards per carry, greater than the other backs in Seattle on gap runs. That is an absolutely stupid number. It's obviously in the 99th percentile. He's averaged 7.8 yards per carry on gap runs in his career. Ridiculous. Like he's like Jim Brown. Like that's absolutely stupid. 7.8 yards per carry on gap runs. DeAndre Swift, during his time in Detroit, has also had a zone heavy system, but only 57% zone, and he's also been good on zone runs. 0.53 yards per carry, greater than other Lions running backs during his career on zone runs. That's in the 73rd percentile, a little bit better than Penny. You know, a 0.05 difference is probably noise, but they're like relatively equivalent zone runners given the situations they've been in. On gap runs, DeAndre Swift has averaged 0.11 yards per carry, greater than other Lions running backs collectively on gap runs. That's solid, 56th percentile, but it's not 3.27, and it's worse than he's been on zone. And the Eagles and the Nick Sirianni offense also lean zone heavy, but not to nearly as extreme a degree as what Penny had in Seattle. Last season, the Eagles running backs' collective carries were 55% zone, which is essentially the same as what DeAndre Swift has handled throughout his career in Detroit. They've been 63% zone heavy in the last 2 years with Nick Sirianni, and during Nick Sirianni's time as the offensive coordinator with Frank Reich calling plays in Indianapolis from, 2018 to 2020, I believe, they were 58% zone. So right there in like the 55 to 65-ish percent zone range, much closer to what DeAndre Swift has seen in Detroit, and a scaled back amount of zone from what Rashad Penny has seen in Seattle. So Penny's going to get to run more gap concepts this year, probably, than what he's seen in his career, and given his like performance on gap runs so far, that should be a good thing. Like, he's been awesome. He's been good on zone. He's been incredible on gap. He's still going to have a heavy diet of zone runs where he's, again, good. but more gap runs as a portion of his total carries probably means good things for Rashad Penny, and it's, sort of a wash there for DeAndre Swift. And also for Swift, unlike Penny, much of Swift's value in real life and in fantasy football comes from his ability as a pass catcher, where he's been good so far in his career. But he now leaves an offense where he was being, led by Jared Goff, where Jared Goff on basic check down, dump off type routes, swing passes, throws to the flat, things like that. Jared Goff was targeting running backs on a per route basis 21% more often than the league-wide average. That's a lot. That's what, every 5 attempts he's targeting running backs one more time than guys league-wide. That's a significant difference. And on advanced routes, angle routes, wheel routes, things that are actually down the field, the types of routes that DeAndre Swift is good at running, Jared Goff was targeting running backs 42% more often than the league-wide average. That's a massive disparity. So on a given set of 5 routes, Jared Goff is targeting running backs on 2 more of them than league-wide averages. That's a big difference. And so now DeAndre Swift goes from that situation to Jalen Hurts, who has targeted running backs on basic check-down, dump-off type plays 16% less often than the league-wide average on a per-route basis. And on advanced routes like angle routes, wheel routes, things like that, downfield against actual coverage, 5.6% less often than league-wide averages. So these are massive shifts in quarterback tendencies. Jalen Hurts also had a scramble rate on a per dropback basis that was nearly double the league average last year. He is a scrambling quarterback who doesn't often check down to running backs, whereas DeAndre Swift has been playing with obviously a non-scrambler in Jared Goff, who has been checking down to running backs like his life depended on it in the last couple seasons. So that hurts DeAndre Swift's prospects as a high-volume receiver in this offense. But all that said, I think I like both of these guys at cost in Dynasty. I know that it's the easiest thing in the world, in the offseason, especially while he's healthy, to say that you're in on Rashad Penny, but I'm in on Rashad Penny, and he's the RB44 right now over at Keep Trade Cut, in the same range as guys like Alexander Mattison, Damian Harris, Antonio Gibson, Tyler Algier, Tank Bigsby, Elijah Mitchell, Kenny Gainwell, who's maybe the RB3 on this team, Devin Singletary, Jalen Warren, Deontay Foreman, a bunch of non-starting running backs. Rashad Penny might be the starting running back on this team, and you're not taking on much risk by drafting him in the same range as those guys, even if you think he's going to get injured this season. DeAndre Swift is the RB17 in Dynasty right now, in the same range as guys like J.K. Dobbins, Derrick Henry, Rachaad White, Isaiah Pacheco, Miles Sanders, Zach Charbonnet. So you're giving up a little bit more there. I actually have him at RB19 in my own rankings. But Miles Sanders is a guy who just had a career year on this essentially the same Eagles offense after having some of the same problems as a runner that Swift has had so far in his career as a run bouncer with questionable vision, questionable decision-making, athletic but not super technically refined. Miles Sanders is this, roughly the same sort of runner that DeAndre Swift has been, and he just had a dominant season behind this offensive line. Would anybody be surprised if Rashad Penny gets hurt in week 6 and then DeAndre Swift turns in a Miles Sanders finish to the season and then jumps back into the top 10 dynasty running backs as a still 25-year-old player next summer? I don't think so. I wouldn't be shocked if that happened. So my approach to this backfield in Dynasty right now is I am buying Rashad Penny almost no matter what. He's the RB44, one of the best running backs on a per carry basis in the entire league. If he stays healthy, he smashes. He could be a 1,000-yard rusher. Even if he doesn't, you got, a couple of 100-yard games maybe, and then you didn't lose much after he gets hurt anyway. But I'm also sleeping like a baby, taking shots on DeAndre Swift at his current price in Dynasty, and he was RB16 3 days ago. So it's, by the time this video comes out, maybe he's the RB18 or 19, and the price continues to fall as people kind of, the price drops after the initial overreaction to the trade. But I like both of these guys in Dynasty. Thanks for watching the video. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, check out noahmoreparties.com, and see you on Wednesday. Peace.
Wow.